Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a topic that I think really defines the modern professional experience, and that's the constant, just relentless pace of high-performance work.
Right.
We're not even looking at how smart people are. We're looking at how their environment can systematically degrade their ability to be smart.
Exactly. Our focus today is really the high cost of all that constant urgency. You should think about roles that demand these immediate, flawless decisions in, really volatile environments.
Like a freight broker. Or a trader on a 24/7 market.
Precisely. They're handling massive financial stakes, persistent micro-stress, and they're just expected to be operating at peak clarity all the time.
That whole environment, it's like a cognitive battlefield that demands total focus, but the very nature of it, the nonstop calls, the split-second deals, the catastrophic delays that are bound to happen, it's actively starving the brain of the resources it needs for strategic thought.
So our mission today is to explore how. How does this urgency just silently ruin judgment, even in the most capable professionals?
And there's a paradox here, isn't there? The one our sources keep bringing up.
Yeah, that so many people in these fields feel like they're, and I'm quoting here, drowning in an ocean of information but starved for wisdom.
That is so incredibly accurate. I mean, when chaos hits, what's the first response from a high achiever?
Get more data.
Get more data, more reports, more tactical solutions. They think if they just knew one more thing, they'd get control back.
But the sources are pretty clear that the issue isn't a data gap. It's how they're mentally processing the overwhelming amount of information they already have.
It's the operating system.
It's the default operating system. The central conflict is that most of us really live on autopilot. We're reacting instantly to stress, to market pressure, client expectations, whatever it is, and we never consciously choose that reaction.
And the research is clear. This isn't some personal flaw. This is not a lack of character.
Not at all. It's just the human brain being wired for survival mode.
Okay, so let's ground this. Let's take a logistics manager who's watching their biggest lane suddenly collapse because of, a regional flood. What does that reactive, that survival mode look like on the inside?
Well, the first cost is that clarity becomes nearly impossible. In survival mode, your prefrontal cortex, where all your strategic thought and foresight lives, it just starts to shut down.
So creativity goes out the window.
To zero. Decision quality plummets, and maybe the most painful part, regret grows because you're constantly just repeating old, non-productive habits. You get easier to push around, highly distractible.
And what about that term decision compression? How does that play into this when the brain is just trying to get immediate psychological relief instead of the best outcome?
Decision compression is basically that feeling of having 5 seconds to solve a month-long problem.
Right.
And these super reactive moments, they push people toward what we call quick psychological escapes.
So in the logistics world, what does that look like?
It could be aggressively lowballing a quote just to get the problem off your desk, or snapping at a dispatcher, or, and this is crucial in business, making a rushed, high-cost decision just to relieve the discomfort of not knowing.
The brain just wants the pain of the decision to end now.
Even if it means sacrificing profit later, it's about relief, not results.
So let's frame this neurologically. What's actually driving these rushed, discomfort-relieving choices?
We use this concept of 2 powerful neurological attractors that really drive behavior under pressure. The first one is the negative emotional attractor, the NEA.
Okay.
And this is very strongly associated with the sympathetic stress response, fight, flight, or freeze.
The classic high-stress state, which I imagine just leads to absolute tunnel vision.
Precisely. The NEA focuses you solely on problems, on shortfalls, on all the external constraints. And when a high performer gets stuck there, they default to what we call compliance behavior.
Meaning they stop trying new things.
They stop innovating. They just follow the old rules, the old habits to minimize whatever risk or punishment they see coming. They don't see possibility, they just see the walls closing in.
So a broker operating in that state might, hide a small mistake?
Or avoid calling the client with bad news, yeah. Because the stress of that potential conflict feels bigger than the strategic need for transparency.
But operating like that is a death sentence long term. So how do high achievers get to that strategic, possibility-focused thinking when they're getting hammered by the market?
They need to find the other attractor, the positive emotional attractor, or PEA.
Okay.
This state is associated with the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest side of things. When you're in the PEA, you're focused on what's possible, you're open to new ideas, and you feel, a real motivation to tackle difficulties, even if they're severe.
The difference is just monumental. One keeps you chained to what went wrong, and the other lets you imagine what you could create. But how practical is it to just, switch systems in the middle of a crisis?
Well, the key insight from the research is that this whole cycle of reactivity, it just continues on autopilot until you learn to consciously pause and see the pattern. The shift isn't about trying harder to be positive. The shift is realizing this panicked reaction isn't me. It's not just the way I am.
It's a habit.
It's just a habit, a circuit in my brain that I can learn to change. That awareness, that's the critical first step.
That really reframes the whole idea of responsibility. The second you see the reaction as just a pattern, you get some distance from it. But practically, how do you interrupt an automatic, deeply wired habit when your amygdala is screaming survival?
This is where we get to the most powerful concept from our sources, and that's the pause. It sounds so simple.
Deceptively simple.
Right. But it is the key. Responding is intentional, reacting is automatic. And between the stimulus, the crisis, the angry client, and your response, there is the possibility of a pause.
So we're not trying to control that first, involuntary rush of adrenaline. That's probably impossible. We're controlling the action that comes after.
Exactly, and the neuroscience backs this up so powerfully. There's this research on voluntary movement and what some call free won't.
Free won't.
I like that. Studies found the brain sends the urge to act, that habitual reaction, about half a second before that urge even registers in your conscious awareness.
Half a second. That is literally the window of opportunity for that freight broker to stop themselves from sending that panicked, terrible email.
It is. The only real control we have over our voluntary behavior exists in that final tiny window before we act. The core discovery here is our veto power.
We can't stop all the crazy thoughts our brain throws at us in a crisis.
No, but we do have a say over which urges we don't follow. We have free won't.
That shifts the entire strategic focus. The power isn't enforcing a good behavior, it's in vetoing a bad one, a habitual one.
Yes. For a high performer who's trying to stop snapping at a client or making a panic trade, that veto power is a monumental realization.
And when they successfully use that veto, even for a split second, what does that feel like?
That's the strategic shift. You force that small pause, and suddenly your options expand just a little. Confidence starts to resurface, your emotional balance stabilizes, and that little spark, that sudden feeling of space, it tells the brain, I'm not stuck, I have a choice.
I really appreciate the concept of the pause, but let's be real. If I'm a logistics leader and I'm watching $50,000 just vanish in real time because a shipment is stuck, my first thought is not going to be find my veto power.
Right.
Why can't I just muscle through it with willpower? I mean, I've tried to force myself out of bad habits, and it never sticks past Tuesday.
Because willpower is a finite resource, and stress actively drains it. You cannot just think your way out of patterns that are shaped by deep-seated stress and emotion.
So intentions aren't enough.
Not at all. Habits are wired into your neural circuitry. Lasting change means you have to interrupt those patterns practically. You have to work from the inside out.
And what does inside out look like if it's not willpower?
It means focusing your attention on the new behavior you want. It's a process of neurological retraining. You have to repeatedly pay enough attention to a new set of brain connections, the circuit for the PEA, or for pausing, and that repetition keeps that new circuit alive until it becomes hardwired. But here's the critical link. You can only sustain that kind of focused attention if your environment isn't constantly draining all of your resources.
Which makes the transition to the external landscape so logical. We've talked about direction, about mindset, the internal work. Now we have to pivot to the outside. Because the sources are incredibly clear on this. The operating environment is very often the root cause of the problem.
Absolutely. For your brain to grow, for you to have sustained clarity, 3 vital factors have to align: direction, mindset, and environment.
And if your environment is actively fighting the other two,
then change is temporary, exhausting, or just about impossible.
So this really means we have to ask ourselves, are our surroundings feeding our vision or starving it? It implies that so many performance problems aren't actually skill deficits. That broker, he knows the market better than anyone.
Right.
But it's an operating environment issue that's stopping him from using that knowledge.
That is the core argument. And we define environment broadly here. It's the people you talk to, the media you consume, the doom scrolling, the 24/7 news. It's your physical workspace, your routines, all of it. The environment is your system's operating system.
Okay, so let's define the extremes then, using the language from the sources. What does an impoverished or toxic environment look like?
An impoverished or toxic environment is one that generates excessive stress, self-doubt, and fear. It's characterized by a high threat perception, low psychological safety, and often, you feel like you have to suppress parts of yourself just to be accepted.
Which takes a huge amount of energy.
Immense emotional energy.
And on the other side, an enriched environment.
That supports growth, safety, aliveness. It actively helps you form those new neurological pathways we were just talking about. And in a high-pressure office, this doesn't mean you remove all the stress. It just means you replace fear-driven pressure with high-support challenge.
This all sounds a little philosophical, but the research grounds it in some pretty dramatic science. I want to talk about Dr. Bruce Lipton's stem cell experiment. It feels like the ultimate proof of environmental control.
It's a profound analogy because it shows that the environment dictates destiny, even at the cellular level. Lipton took genetically identical stem cells.
Identical.
And he placed them in 3 petri dishes with slightly different liquid culture mediums. That was the cell's immediate environment.
It's just its surroundings, its whole world.
Right. After just 1 week, those identical cells had become 3 totally different types of cells. You had muscle cells, bone cells, and fat cells.
Based only on the culture medium they were in.
Only on that. The gene expression, the very identity of the cell, was completely controlled by its environment.
So if we map that onto a corporate environment, a volatile trading floor, if the culture medium controls the cell's fate, what's the culture medium for us?
That's the critical translation. The culture medium is the chemistry of our blood, and the brain is the chemist.
Okay.
The brain translates the mind's image, your goals, your beliefs, your perception of your environment, your boss's tone of voice. It translates all that into the chemistry of your blood.
So if the leader of a company is constantly broadcasting fear and urgency,
Then the chemical environment of every single employee is saturated with cortisol and stress hormones.
meaning our perception of our operating environment is the chemistry that dictates our internal state, right down to the cellular level.
It is the loop. If you perceive a hostile, high-threat environment, your body creates that chemical reality, which shuts down the PEA and locks you into the NEA.
And then you get all those reactive behaviors we talked about.
Exactly. It reminds me of the story of Stamatis. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer, given 6 months to live. He chose to move back to Icaria, a Greek blue zone.
Known for longevity.
Right. And he lived another 35 years. Now, the surface explanation is just, well, he changed his environment. He escaped the stress.
Embraced the relaxed Mediterranean pace.
He did. But the deeper insight is what he did there. He moved to a place with community and low striving, and he set a worthwhile goal. He decided to plant a vineyard.
He had a purpose, a direction.
A direction that gave him a reason to live, that maintained a positive internal state. He changed his external world, which changed his perception, which changed his internal chemistry. It wasn't a new drug, it was the perfect alignment of direction, mindset, and environment.
That is a perfect summation of the whole journey we've taken today. From the tiny demands of a high-pressure moment, through the science of reaction and the veto power, all the way to the absolute necessity of an enriched environment.
And the primary takeaway for you, the listener, has to be this. Stressful environments systematically train us to react on autopilot. They create these deeply wired neural pathways of decision compression and panic.
So the goal isn't just to survive the next crisis.
The long-term goal is to question the environment that generated that crisis response in the first place.
We have to become aware of our comfort zone, even if that zone is actually deeply painful and self-limiting, because that's where the old reactive patterns are stored and reinforced.
If you keep reacting poorly in the same setting over and over, maybe the setting itself is the problem.
Which brings us back to that initial paradox. What's fascinating here is the conclusion.
That many capable, high-performing professionals who are struggling with confusion and degraded judgment, like that broker making rushed, reactive decisions, they don't actually need more information. They don't need more tools or tactics. They have plenty of information.
Right.
To regain genuine clarity and strategic capacity and the ability to pause and veto, what they truly need is a different operating environment.
That is a powerful and frankly challenging thought to end on. Because changing the environment is often the hardest work of all. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the intersection of high performance, chronic stress, and the operating system of the modern professional.
We'd encourage you to just observe your own operating environment over the coming days. Pay attention not just to the tasks, but to the emotional chemistry the tasks create.
And maybe identify just one single aspect, digital, physical, or social, that might be starving rather than feeding your focus. See what happens when you decide to veto that habitual reaction and choose a conscious strategic response instead.